I'm sure you've seen an old movie, or maybe old newsreel, that had something to do with the Soviet Union, and you probably saw a car that looked like this, and then you probably saw another, and so on. I know I did when I was in my history classes, or watching old newsreels or documentaries. This is a VAZ 2101, also called Zhiguli, and it was made by, you guessed it, VAZ, or Volga Automobile Factory. In today's video, we'll go through the history of the factory, the models of the car with the exception of the export models, and how it is today, plus a sneak peek of an upcoming video. In the early 1960s, Moskvich, Gaz, and Zaz were manufacturing a variety of cars and trucks, but the Soviet government wanted to diversify and broaden their motor vehicle industry. The 15-year Transportation Modernization Plan announced in 1965 called for increasing production of automobiles and heavy trucks, so the Soviet government decided to build an even larger car manufacturing plant that would produce a low-cost car for the people, like the Volkswagen Type 1 or the Citroën 2CV. For reasons of cost efficiency and shortening the time required to start production, it was decided to sign a license agreement with a foreign company to produce cars based on an existing modern car. Several companies were considered, like Volkswagen, Ford, Peugeot, Renault, and Fiat. The Fiat 124 was ultimately chosen because of its simple, sturdy design, being easy to manufacture and repair, although some of the other models came close. The plant was built in just 4 years, 1966 to 1970, in the small town of Stavropol. Stavropol was eventually renamed to Togliatti, after Palmiro Togliatti, the head of the Italian Communist Party, who died shortly before the construction of the plant began. The city of Togliatti is also sometimes called Togliatti. The Fiat-derived cars to be produced were designated as VAZ 2101. These numbers are a Soviet classification system. Here, the 2 means small class. The next number tells you the displacement of the engine, 1 meaning between 1,100 cubic centimeters and 1,299 cubic centimeters. And the last 2 numbers are the model number. Since this was the first model, it had the number 1, or 01, thus 2101. But that's too complicated, so it was given a simpler name to be used, Zhiguli. This name was chosen due to the close proximity of the Zhiguli Mountains to the factory. Although a new name was not the only change to the car, it went through many changes to better adapt it to the driving conditions of Eastern Bloc nations. The main differences between the VAZ 2101 and the Fiat 124 are a new, domestically designed engine with an overhead camshaft instead of overhead valve engine from Fiat. Also, the use of thicker gauge steel for the body, with reinforcement in key chassis areas, after cracking was discovered during durability testing. Drum brakes replaced the rear discs, although front brakes remained the disc type. Some of the smaller changes include raising the suspension to have better road clearance due to poor quality roads. Also, the addition of a starting hand crank and manual auxiliary fuel pump in case of issues in cold weather environments, but these last 2 features were eventually dropped. The first VAZ 2101 was produced on the 22nd of April 1970. Although the production of this car was started before the whole factory was completed, so it would be completed on Vladimir Lenin's 100th birthday. About 22,000 VAZ 2101s were built in just 1970, with the per-year capacity at the end of 1973 reaching 660,000 cars. A third production line was added in October of 1974, boosting output up to 2,230 cars a day. In 1971, the VAZ 2102 was introduced. It was a station wagon version of the 2101. Over 660,000 were built by the end of production in 1986, and these were exported to Great Britain in 1974, and they could be bought for only £979. In 1972, the VAZ 2103 was released, as a more deluxe version of the 2101. It was essentially the same car but with a few upgrades like a more powerful 75 horsepower engine, a vacuum brake booster, as well as self-adjusting rear brakes. The inside of the car got a new steering wheel and improved dashboard, featuring wood imitation, a tachometer, an oil pressure gauge, and a front panel clock. There were external cosmetic changes as well, such as the new double headlights and front grille. In 1974, VAZ began producing Wankel engines under license from NSU Motor Works in Germany. Work began in 1976 designing a Wankel engine VAZ 2101-8. 8 is just the modification number. Only 250 of these were made, and they were designated for the Soviet police and KGB, but they had a massive issue of the engines wearing out after about 20,000 kilometers. In 1975, production reached 750,000 cars in the year, making the Togliatti plant the third most productive in the world. Also, between 1977 and 1981, VAZ acquired 30 welding robots from Japanese companies, which helped speed the production even more. In 1976, the VAZ 2106 was released. This was developed from the 2103 as a way to reduce unit cost, and they did this by significantly reducing the expensive chrome parts. But with the loss of the chrome came improvements elsewhere, such as a new 78 horsepower engine, adjustable headrests, and reverse lights. The 2106 was the most numerous Zhiguli and was usually seen as a very prestigious car, one of the best that regular citizens could buy. In 1977, the designers at VAZ released their own domestic design of an SUV-type vehicle, which had been in testing and development since 1971. It was called the VAZ 2121, or Niva. This highly popular and innovative car was made with off-road use in mind, featuring a gearbox with a central differential lock lever, as well as a low and high-range selector lever. The Niva was the world's first mass-produced off-road vehicle with a unibody construction. In 1980, the VAZ 2105 was introduced. This was the longest produced Zhiguli from 1980 to 2006, and it was also the cheapest to buy. Again, there were some cutbacks and cosmetic changes. All of the few remaining chrome parts were replaced with black painted metal, and the triangle windbreakers on the front windows were removed. The panels of the car now had angular lines, and the car also received new types of lights. The interior didn't change a lot except for a new layout of heating vents which reduced the glove box size. Also in 1980, there were massive strikes at the factory. They were reported by some Western media. In 1982, the VAZ 2107 was released. This was a deluxe modification of the 2105. This had improvements such as a better engine, better cabin heating and cooling, more comfortable seats and nicer interior upholstery, and a different style of lights to name some of the changes. It is still mostly the very same car. In 1984, VAZ released the 2104. This was the station wagon modification to the 2105 and is basically identical besides the obvious changes. Also in 1984 came the VAZ 2108, or Sputnik, a domestically designed, futuristic-looking, three-door front-wheel drive hatchback. The concept of this car was intended as a car for housewives with its increased safety and two doors so the children wouldn't fall out. But it quickly found itself becoming popular with the youth because of its sporty, futuristic looks and cheaper price tag. The export name of Samara eventually replaced the name Sputnik and became the official name of the family. In 1987, the VAZ 2109 was released. It was a 5-door version of the 2108 with a redesigned front end, but still mostly the same car. By the late 1980s, VAZ was suffering from deterioration of its capital goods, such as tools and machinery, due to poor investment of resources over a long period of time. Also, unproductive and antiquated management and leadership contributed to the decline. The first privately owned VAZ dealership was established by Boris Berezovsky in 1989. These types of dealerships quickly turned into criminal rackets that simply stole cars from the factory to resell for personal profit. In June of 1991, Bear Stearns was hired by the Soviet government to conduct an appraisal of VAZ and negotiate a venture with a Western partner in preparation for the privatization of the company and eventual Soviet collapse. An independent trade union was also established the same year, as workers deemed the traditional trade union to be too close to the interests of the corrupt management. In January of 1993, VAZ was re-established as a joint stock company under Russian law called VAZ. The company came to be controlled by the management, including Vladimir Kadanikov, head of VAZ. As with many other privatized post-Soviet companies, the financial situation at VAZ was very troubling, with workers being unpaid for months at a time. The VAZ 110 series sedan was introduced in 1995. It was a simple design that was cheap to produce. It also had a station wagon version, the VAZ 111, and a hatchback, the VAZ 112. By 1995, car sales, distribution, and spare parts at VAZ were mostly controlled by criminal organizations. This situation was made possible by the close relationship that existed between the criminals and the corrupt management. Additionally, these gangsters were hired to harass and control workers and to stop strikes. And by late 1996, VAZ had become the country's largest tax debtor, owing the equivalent of $2.4 billion in unpaid taxes. In 1997, the Ministry of Internal Affairs launched Operation Cyclone, an investigation that ultimately uncovered evidence that the gangsters connected to VAZ had carried out at least 65 murders of company managers, dealers, and business rivals. This caused the reputation of VAZ to sink in the eyes of the public and government. The 1998 Russian financial crisis improved the company's market position, oddly enough, by increasing export sales and making imported cars too expensive for the average Russian. The VAZ 2120 Nadezhda, a minivan based on the Lada Niva, was introduced in 1998. In the second half of the 1990s, a little effort was made to improve the quality of production, but in 1999, almost 50,000 cars were still being assembled with missing parts. In March of 2008, Renault purchased a 25% stake in VAZ in a $1 billion deal, with Rostec retaining most of the remaining 75%. The onset of the Great Recession caused considerable problems to the company. By April of 2009, VAZ was on the verge of bankruptcy, but a $600 million bailout from the Russian government managed to save the company. By the end of 2010, the automotive production had returned to pre-crisis levels. In 2011, production of the classic Zhiguli 2105 and 2107 models were completely moved from the Togliatti plant to the Izh-Avto plant near Izhevsk, to make space for the company's upcoming 2016 model. And in April of 2012, VAZ confirmed the end of production of the Zhiguli model of cars after more than 40 years. On the 3rd of May 2012, the Renault-Nissan alliance signed a letter of intent to raise its stake in VAZ to 51.01%. On the 12th of December 2012, the Renault-Nissan alliance formed a joint venture with Rostec with the aim of becoming the long-term controlling shareholder of VAZ. The takeover of VAZ was completed in June 2014, and the two companies of the Renault-Nissan alliance took a combined 67.1% stake of Alliance Rostec, which in turn then acquired 74.5% of VAZ, thereby giving Renault and Nissan indirect control over the Russian manufacturer. In March 2016, Nicolas Maurer became the company's CEO. In 2016, Carlos Ghosn, Renault-Nissan chairman, ceded his VAZ chairman position to Sergei Skvortsov, the deputy director of Rostec, also the minority shareholder in VAZ. Despite massive layoffs since 2008, in 2016 the company remained unprofitable. In October of 2016, Renault invested $1.33 billion in another recapitalization of VAZ, this time without the involvement of Nissan, making VAZ a subsidiary of the French Renault company. In September of 2017, Nissan sold its VAZ stake to Renault for 45 million euros. In December of 2018, Renault and Rostec completed the acquisition of all VAZ shares through their Alliance Rostec venture. The company then delisted from the Moscow exchange, and in 2018 VAZ posted a net profit of 90.5 million, its first positive result in a decade. After Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February of 2022, VAZ announced the suspension of assembly of cars in the Tolyatti and Izhevsk factories from the 5th of March. The company issued a press release blaming the, quote, ongoing crisis in the supply of electronic components. On the 16th of May 2022, Renault said it had sold its controlling stake in VAZ to the Central Research and Development Automobile and Engine Institute, a Russian state-owned research center, for 1 ruble. But the agreement has a buyback option for Renault within 6 years of the sale. In November 2022, the controlling shareholder of VAZ, the Russian government, acquired Nissan's St. Petersburg production facilities for a, quote, symbolic price, also with a 6-year buyback option. There are 5 main currently produced models at the VAZ factory prior to March 5, 2022. They include the VAZ 2121 Niva, still in production since 1977 with many changes and upgrades. The Lada Niva Travel, or sometimes called the Niva 2, which is a CUV, crossover utility vehicle that has been produced since 1998, also with a few changes since the original. The Lada Granta, which is a subcompact car jointly developed by VAZ and Renault, which has been produced since 2011. Lada Largus, a compact station wagon jointly developed by VAZ, Renault, and Nissan. It went into production in 2012. And lastly, the Lada Vesta, the most advanced car produced by VAZ. Although this was produced at the Izhevsk factory since 2015, it is a subcompact sedan that comes equipped with an airbag, anti-lock braking system with brake assist, electronic brake force distribution, electronic stability control, traction control systems, hill start assistance, ERA GLONASS emergency systems, a tilt telescoping adjustable steering column, remote controlled car central locking system with a folding key, trip computer, car alarm, 15 or 16-inch wheels, and a full-size spare tires. Most of these things have never been included in any VAZ production car. I'll take this moment to talk about all the various export models. Almost every production car from VAZ was exported around the globe under the Lada brand name. There are many different names for each model in different countries, but all of the export models are generally the same as the standard models. Well, that's it for today's video. Now you know the quick version of the history of VAZ and its cars. A factory that once produced some of the most sought-after and prestigious cars of the Soviet Union, and after the fall of the Iron Curtain, was outclassed by almost everything. I hope you enjoyed the history of VAZ. Please remember to like and subscribe. And here's a little sneak peek of an upcoming video. Thank you for watching.